Yes, it's a pleasure to welcome you all to Addressing Racial Inequalities and Promoting Ethnic Justice at George Mason University. And I think I have an echo. Do I have an echo? I apologize for having an echo, but I'm just going to go ahead and read the statement. We are living and working on stolen land from Indigenous people of the Americas. No words can rectify the wrongs imposed upon those who inhabited this land and subsequently had their lands unjustly stolen via immoral settler colonization. However, we state this acknowledgement to honor and preserve their histories and stand in solidarity with the lineage's efforts to reclaim their lands and foster as much reconciliation as humanly possible. We honor the following tribes who inhabit this land in Virginia: the Pamunkey Indian Tribe, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Upper Mattaponi, Rappahannock, Ansaman, and Monacan. And I turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This session is titled Addressing Racial Inequalities and Promoting Ethnic Justice at George Mason University. We'll be talking about some very important initiatives that are taking place right now, and work of many people on these amazing speakers that we have are heading a very important program to address these issues. Last year, in the summer of 2020, all the issues that we are living as a society in the United States and in different parts of the world have had a momentum with the Black Lives Matter movement. And we kind of we're able to, at that moment, to figure out the many inequalities and the racial inequalities that take place. We go beyond that to promote also ethnic justice. So this panel explains the work at GMU regarding diversity, inclusion, belonging space. This work is related to the United Nations SDG Goal number 10, and the panelists will discuss the following initiatives to address racial inequalities and promote ethnic justice: the President's Task Force on Anti-Racism and Inclusive Excellence. That was also part of the efforts that are taking place right now to address the issues and challenges that were very clearly represented in the Black Lives Matter movement and what happened afterwards. The Quality Enhancement Plan of George Mason University, also the QEP, that it's in connection with the President's Task Force on Anti-Racism and Inclusive Excellence, and the Enslaved Children project that we have at the university. And the last speaker is going to be, I am going to be talking about the projects that I do to try to study the challenges faced by immigrants and refugees in the United States. So these are probably very, very important initiatives, but many other faculty members at GMU, groups of researchers are doing very important work that go beyond these very initiatives and that individual efforts to address racial inequalities and promoting ethnic justice. So I will welcome everybody, and I'm going to go. We will have each speaker talking between 8 and 10 minutes. We have 4 speakers. The first speaker is Wendy and Manuel Scott. She's professor of integrative studies and history at the College of Humanities and Social Sciences and George Mason University. She will talk about the initiative she's leading, the work that we're doing in that regard. And thank you, Wendy, for being here. Dr. Manuel Scott, it's a pleasure to have you speaking here. This is an all women's panel, and this is an incredible opportunity to have you all here. Thank you very much, Wendy. This is your space, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for pulling us all together in this virtual space this morning. And I'm just pleased to be able to share the work that I've been doing with colleagues. So let me just get my notes up in front of me. All right. So today and last night in particular, and this morning when I awoke, I felt very contemplative. And so I took some time in the dark hours of this morning to jot down thoughts that I wanted to share with you. And so I awoke thinking about who we were before the pandemic. I awoke thinking about who we will be a year from now, who we will be in the future. And I awoke thinking about the space between our past and our unnamed future, and the we who occupy the temporal space between. Who are we in this now? A now that is a place of vulnerability and hopefulness, a now that is a place of fear and righteous anger, a now whose soul is weary but not defeated, a now that desperately clutches at memories of the before times and a fierce longing for a less violent and violating future. A now is where we meet today. So now I speak to you from Virginia, on the land cared for by indigenous folk who lovingly stewarded these lands for millennia. Now we meet days after a brutal assault on our AAPI friends and family. Now we meet while brown immigrant babies are held on our southern border. And now we meet when the quotidian murder of Black folks is normal and anticipated. So, how are we as institutions of higher education to respond to the now? Who are we going to be in this now, and who do we want to be in the yet unknown, unnamed future? We might find the answer in the great Dr. Martin Luther King's words. At Western Michigan in December 1963, he said, and I quote, "I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few, leave millions of God's children smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society. I never intend to adjust myself to the madness of militarism, to self-defeating effects of physical violence," end quote. He never intended to adjust to systems, structures, institutions of inequality, or to the malignant racial violence that was ever present in his now. King preferred to engage in what he called critically maladjusted. And I suggest to you that we find inspiration in King's idea. We must be critically maladjusted to racism, sexism, ableism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. We must be critically maladjusted to malicious BIPOC and AAPI death. We, the historically disposable and dispossessed, must stand and stay committed to the idea of education as the practice of freedom. Critical maladjustment must be our praxis now. A justice-centered praxis that cares for the forgotten, silenced, and violated in our past and in our now. At Mason, our Enslaved People of George Mason Memorial Project is an example of scholarly critical maladjustment. In 2016, Mason students wanted to know more about George Mason IV as a slaveholder. They asked, why don't we talk about the fact that he held Black men, women, children in lifelong, inheritable bondage? We answered students' call. In the summer of 2017, 5 undergraduates and 4 Mason faculty members began an incredible research journey that was funded by our Office of Student Research. Our students wanted to uncover who George Mason IV, George Mason, the slaveholder, was, but most importantly, who were the enslaved? What were their names? What were their dreams for the future? We asked how we might tell their story, excavate their rich histories of loss, of survival, of resilience, of resistance. We discovered that a young enslaved Penny was taken from her family on a Maryland plantation and given to George Mason IV's daughter, Anne, on his Virginia plantation. They were both 10 years old. In the archival record, students located Oronico, age 12, enslaved at Gunston Hall, Cato, age 10, Tender Agnes and Jenny, both age 8, and wee little Charity, age 5, enslaved by George Mason. We learned that multiple enslaved men like Dick and Clem absconded from Mason's Gunston Hall plantation in pursuit of their liberty and freedom. We learned that there is no evidence of George Mason IV freeing a single person, man, woman, little girl, little boy. The EPGM, Enslaved People of George Mason Project, makes plain that memorialization of the enslaved, the practice of memory making, is a kind of intellectual care, work, and critical maladjustment that we need in this now. The Memorial Project requires us to be attentive to the lives of the enslaved people and not adjust to their historical erasure. We focused on deepening and expanding our community's understanding of the people George Mason IV owned. The memorial is designed to move the dialogue beyond a singular valorization of the notable historic figures to include representation of marginalized and traditionally oppressed groups. This type of inclusive public history demonstrates the impact of historical research as critical maladjustment, as justice-centered work focused on repairing deep societal wounds and making visible, making seen that which has been erased, obscured, and forgotten. This memorial invites an epistemic shift because it requires the George Mason University community to sit with the fullness of Virginia's violent past, of America's violent past, and interrogate how that past, our now, and our future are permanently braided together. My plea and King's plea remind us that we must adopt critically maladjusted praxis, a critically maladjusted practice today in this now, so that we might have a better future. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wendy. Now we have Shanita Parker. Let me introduce you properly. Okay. Shanita Rochelle Parker, who's Assistant Vice President of Human Resources, Strategy, and Talent Management at George Mason University. She is co-chair of the President Task Force on Anti-Racism and Inclusive Excellence, ARIE initiative. Shanita, thank you very much for being here and for sharing with us the amazing work that a lot of faculty members that with your leadership are doing in this regard. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. And I feel really lucky and fortunate because not only to be on this panel this morning, but to be able to be on it with my co-chair, Dr. Wendy Manuel Scott. It has been an absolute pleasure and real honor to as serve as co-chair of the President's Anti-Racism and Inclusive Excellence Task Force, because it is the right thing to do in the right moment. It is an opportunity to come together with so many faculty and staff and to really speak to some of what Wendy was talking about already this morning. It's about changing our now so that we shape a different future. And I think that there has been so much work at Mason over the years, and we've consistently said that one of the real important pieces to note around the Anti-Racism and Inclusive Excellence Task Force is that while the President's charge, when the group kicked off last year, August, it was, to have Mason become a national exemplar of anti-racism and inclusive excellence, and was charged really with looking at a variety of areas and every aspect of the organization. And at the same time, while that was certainly responsive to so many of the national issues and incidents that we were seeing, it is work that was also building upon so much of the other work that we've been doing at Mason. And it's really, I think, important to recognize that we at Mason have for so long been looking at what it means to live our values, in the sense of when we say students come first, what does that mean? And so what is the student experience? And when there are experiences that disenfranchise, that do not represent, that are inequitable, we need to look at that, because if our students come first, we need to be paying attention to that, addressing and responding to those. When we say that we act with integrity, what does that mean for the university? When we talk about we thrive together, how can we thrive together if we are not actually responsive to the needs of all, if we are not inclusive? And so it really is this culmination, a moment where we have an opportunity with the Anti-Racism and Inclusive Excellence Task Force to continue to ensure that we remain committed to living our values, that our values are not simply words on a piece of paper or a website, but they are things that we actively live. With the task force, it's been really fascinating and really wonderful to see all of the ways in which, when we look across the university, it's comprised of 6 committees, and those 6 committees really do allow us to look at every aspect of the university. The committees range from campus and community engagement, really looking at all aspects of a variety of activities. One in particular that is representative of some of the challenges we have at Mason, but we know we also have those challenges nationally, and that's our campus policing. So there will be a campus policing advisory board and other activities that are focused, but that's one major effort that the Campus and Community Engagement Committee is looking at, to really begin to recognize what does community policing look like? What does it mean to have a real community policing effort, and a policing effort that would be more humanistic? And so it's really interesting to think about students, faculty, staff, and the police coming together to talk about that and really shape a community policing effort that is going to be are going to have an impact on the entire community. We have the Curriculum and Pedagogy Committee looking at what does it mean to actually offer a course to all, a foundational course to all students, focused on undergraduate, and recognizing that the population of undergraduates and starting there and that experience is really critical, but also clearly recognizing that graduate students and having access to these types of conversations. We're talking about the fact that, again, when we look at George Mason, one of the things that we continuously note, that we are continuously proud of, is the diversity of our students. But I think that what we're doing when we talk about the curriculum and creating pedagogy around that diversity is recognizing that we need to move beyond just the recognition of that, the fact of diversity, and really much more learning about what it means to truly be inclusive. And so our student experience is different. Our students are really, I think, really fueling us to look more closely at these types of things. And I think that that's certainly shared with what Wendy spoke about in terms of the Enslaved People of George Mason project, that the students, it started there with their interest, with their inquiry. And I think that as the Curriculum and Pedagogy Committee is looking and working to think about designing this type of course, again, it's really in response to some of what students say is needed. One of the other committees that is part of the task force is our Training and Development Committee. And that then takes us to recognize the fact that faculty and staff are part of the community, an important part of the community, that they often, what we note and what is one of our real challenges and something that we're focused on, is that our faculty are often don't have the same representative diversity that our students do. And so we are certainly recognizing that it's important for us to have training and developmental opportunities that help to build the competencies that are needed for the behavioral change that we need for us to be able to be an inclusive excellence community. And so that committee is really looking at what it means to create training programs and on a variety of things, microaggressions, what does inclusive excellence mean? What does anti-racism mean? And really helping faculty and staff to begin to build those competencies, develop and grow in a way and learn and stretch themselves in a way so that they can be responsive to the students and the students' needs. We have also the University Practices and Policies Committee. And when I say that that is wide sweeping, that's an understatement, because it really does have and was charged to take a look at all of the policies, practices at the university that in any way may be anti-racist, or maybe in some way not promoting anti-racism, that in some way are perhaps perpetuating practices that could be considered inequitable. And so we are in that committee really taking a very intentional look at what are the policies and practices that shape our behaviors, our actions, that really in some way could provide obstacles to the inclusive excellence that we're seeking. And so that committee, again, wide sweeping, lots of really good work going on there. We have our research committee. I think it's important to think about, again, when we talk about the work of faculty, when we talk about opportunities for students to be doing research that is broader and more representative of the diversity on our campus, and really making sure that we have the support and create opportunities for that research, support that for faculty, and create those opportunities for students. And so it's really, I think, when we look at those 5 main committees and then the additional 6th committee of our Student Voice Committee, we bring it back to the fact that the student experience, the student voice, is one that is woven throughout each of those other committees. And at the same time, we recognize the importance of students' desires, work, and experience, and have a separate committee that really does provide them. It provides them a forum to speak their truth and to really help guide us, because I think in so many ways that really is that is what they're serving. They're serving as our guides on this journey to really sort of push forward and again think more critically about our now, so that we can have a very different future, a future that is anti-racist, a future that is more inclusive. The work of the committees, it is a large group. Wendy will attest. We started, and I think, we had some probably naive ideas about a group of 15, maybe 20 people. The task force ended up being 32. And then with committees and committee membership, it's probably about 100 people. That's a good problem to have, because what it speaks to is it speaks to people's commitment, energy to this work, to making a change. And we continue to have people who are interested in being involved, and we'll continue to see more people become involved with the work of the committees, in particular because I think the phase we're at now is exciting in the sense that each committee has brought forward 3 initial recommendations, offered those to the Mason community. We've gotten some feedback. Dr. Washington has the opportunity to look at those, respond, and react. And we really are then moving on to think about what does it mean to implement some of these. And that's a whole nother sort of task to take on, but it's exciting because that's really where the rubber meets the road, for lack of a better term, and that's really where we're going to see so many of the changes that we've envisioned being able to come to life. And I'm going to pause there. I do see that there's a question in the chat. Guadalupe, do you want me to?
Yes, Shanita. Anne Amagro is asking, in an institution the size of Mason, how do you approach reviewing all policies and practices and evaluating them relative to the benchmark of anti-racism in the relatively short time from creation of the task force to the report release?
So that, very good question, because I think really what we've tried to do is we've tried to do it bite-sized. That committee is one of our larger committees. And it is a committee, you can actually see the work on the website, but it's really interesting because that's probably one of our larger reports. I mean, it recognizes that there are a variety of practices and policies. And if they took a look at those, the report that they shared is probably about 60 pages long. And it is, I think, important to note that part of the process of reviewing them all really was representative of the committee makeup, so that you had individuals that are across a variety of areas, units, schools, colleges, so that we could almost take them bite-sized and we could look at those individual areas and then sort of bring it back to the whole and begin some comprehensive review. That's not to say I think that it will be an iterative process, because even with 60 pages, and to note, and as you said, with a university the size of Mason, there are certainly going to be things as we do some of this work and bring things forward, we're going to recognize something that we didn't identify, and those things are going to be called to our attention. And so I do see it as an iterative process, but I think that the initial process was very focused, again, about school, college, unit, departments, representation of the committees, and really being able to take a look at those individual pockets and the practices and policies that are part of those.
Great. Thank you very much, Shanita. I want to remind everybody, if you have any question, just please write it down in the chat, and I'm going to ask these questions. Thank you very much, Shanita. Now we have a Dr. Kristen Wright, who's the Director of Civic Engagement at George Mason University, and she leads the Quality Enhancement Plans, QUP, at the university. Thank you very much, Kristen, for being here. It's very early, but we appreciate the effort everybody has done and the amazing work that you do. Thank you for being here, Kristen.
Awesome. Thank you, Guadalupe and Lisa, for the invitation. And I'm really thrilled to be joining Wendy and Shanita in this conversation, and appreciate being able to share the floor with both of them. I think before diving into kind of what my work is and what the QEP is, do 2 quick things. One is, I think, just acknowledge that my own identity is as a white, able-bodied, graduate educated female doing this work at an institution of higher education like Mason. The labor looks different for me than it does for other faculty of color, women of color, other students, and folks with different experiences than my own. And the pandemics, the intersections of racial injustice and the COVID-19 pandemic and everything have also looked different for me. And the labor feels different for me. And I think it's really important to also acknowledge that a lot of the work that has preceded me at Mason, but also when it comes to scholarship around community and civic engagement, has been the work and the scholarship and the thoughts and the passions and labors of a lot of members of the BIPOC community, and specifically women of color in this space. And so I stand in this work, I think, knowing that and acknowledging that, and also feel very called to making space in the work that I do to be able to share voice, use the platform and the resources that I have as an agent of an institution to make the university more welcoming, more inclusive, and do better in its community. And so I think all of that's really important to acknowledge in doing this work, and especially in sharing this platform with this wonderful group of women at Mason. Another thing that I think just grounds sort of my philosophy and worldview in coming to this work is I come as someone who believes really strongly in the sort of public purposes of higher education, the idea that our institutions are here to ask the question, sort of higher education for what, for whom, and with whom, right? And who gets to benefit from our institutions of higher education and from the work that we do, and who gets to be a part of these institutions. And that work has brought me to doing civic and community engagement work as an institution, and believing really strongly that we have an obligation, especially as a large research institution that's a public institution in Virginia, to involve our community as co-educators, as co-creators of knowledge, have kind of open door through the university and the community. And a lot of times that doesn't get rewarded or acknowledged at the university level, especially at the level of the president. And so when he announced the task force, of which Sharnit and Wendy co-chair, and named community engagement as an arm of that was super exciting to me. And then shortly after that, the civic engagement plan that I'll talk a little bit about, called the Enhancement Plan, was selected for the university. So we have these two really amazing and exciting sort of initiatives that are working together to really do culture transformation at Mason, both internal culture and externally, how we're engaging with our community. And that's really exciting. And as Sharnit and Wendy have talked about, it's also moving a lot of people and a lot of parts and institutional change. And so that's been a learning experience for sure. So I'll talk a little bit about, I'm going to, the boring part really quickly of what is a quality enhancement plan, because that's not language that's germane to everyone. And it was not to me 8 months ago. So it's an initiative connected to George Mason's reaffirmation and reaccreditation as an institution. And so a part of SAC-COC, which is our accreditation body, every 10 years, we have to select a topic that is connected to student learning or connected to the campus culture that we want to improve over the course of a 5-year evaluation period. So the process lasts more like 6 or 7 years, because from topic selection through about a year long of planning, we don't start our year one until April of 2022. So we're right now in the pre-planning, pre-assessment year, trying to do all of the foundation laying, really capacity building, community building, making sure this is a generative process that has had a lot of voices at the table. That's an expectation of the process, is that we involve folks from across campus. So there's representation from every school and college, from a number of our different university life partners, which is student affairs for Mason, our university life partners, our government and community affairs, our institutional effectiveness and planning, student representatives, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. So it's really to span kind of the experience and make sure that we have voices that are heard. So we went through kind of a voting process, a campus presentation process, and then a number of folks, we landed on civic and community engagement as our topic, but really wanted to make sure that it was connected to and an extension of the work of the President's task force. So it's not just civic and community engagement, but it's civic and community engagement to contribute to the larger goal of anti-racism, and Mason being an institution that has really worked forward towards removing racist policies and practices, replacing them with anti-racist policies and practices. And so this QEP is an extension of that work, to be able to really work in concert with what Wendy and Sharnit have been doing. So we've been looking to kind of figure out how we do this campus-wide initiative in the ways that are really connected to what the task force is doing. So looking at staff and faculty development, student experiences, curriculum, and community engagement. And our vision really is that by embedding critical service learning and civic engagement into academic and co-curricular experiences, we'll be able to equip students with knowledge, skills, and attitudes to understand themselves as agents of change, identify and disrupt racist practices, and work collaboratively towards positive social change. So that's kind of the vision statement that we're working with to guide the ways that we do that, and being able to really make sure that Mason is an institution where students are able to have the kind of learning experiences that help them understand, have experiential, components so that they're ready to have careers, but also to have them understand ethics, understand that there are people that are a result of a product of collaborators in, whatever kind of industry our students work in. People are impacted by decisions. And I think right now we have no more glaring examples in our world of leaders and leadership that doesn't always remember that people are impacted by our decisions. And so that's, I think if I could dream up the outcomes, is that every student graduates Mason knowing that and being guided and grounded in whatever work they go into, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, whether they're educators themselves, that they're grounded in that idea that our decisions, our work, our activities impact people. And so that's really what we're hoping to do with this. And it's all connected to student learning. So we get the kind of opportunity of really thinking through what are the academic experiences, what are some of the experiences at the orientation and sort of transition and first year experience students should have, what kind of training and what kind of training do faculty and staff need to have to be able to implement and facilitate those experiences for students, all of which grounded in civic and community learning outcomes. So I might stop there just to start seeing, I guess, what kind of questions and dialogue we can have about how our initiatives work together and how, and I know Guadalupe, you still need to share too. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kristen. I have here more questions, but maybe we will leave because these questions are more general. So I'm going to leave them for all of us to respond. Lisa is going. Thank you, Lisa.
Yes, so it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our last speaker of the panel, Dr. Guadalupe Cabrera. She's an associate professor at the Schar School of Policy and Government. Her areas of expertise are Mexico-U.S. relations, organized crime, immigration, border security, social movements, and human trafficking. And she's also a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and a non-resident scholar at the Baker Institute Center for the United States and Mexico. And so I turn it over to you, Dr. Correa.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lisa. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to chair this panel with you and to share my experiences with this amazing participants and speakers. I would like to talk a little bit about my work as a faculty member at the work with my students and with other colleagues, particularly connected to the issues that you mentioned, but mostly to migration and immigration. I was born and raised in Mexico and I studied in the United States, but lived 8 years in Brownsville, Texas at the Mexico-US border. And I was focusing first on study organized crime because the city where I was living at, the sister city, what's called Matamoros, Tamaulipas in Mexico, my country, was experiencing a very complicated process of disintegration of the social networks and the increase in the levels of violence and the role of the drug trafficking organizations connected to a security strategy, a militarized security strategy, caused a lot of problems, and that has reproduced in many ways that it has driven people to get out of their land and to try to come to the United States. So I started studying what was happening with the so-called drug cartels, other criminal groups along the border. I was able to travel all along the border from Brownsville, Matamoros to Tijuana, San Diego. So I know the border very well and all its problems. I started to focus on security, but at the same time, I started to find people. I started to find all the social problems that happen at the border, and I wanted to study them. I had the privilege of receiving a grant from the Trafficking in Persons Office of the State Department to study the relationship between human smuggling, human trafficking, and organized crime. And I traveled for a year and a half from the Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, to the border, to the U.S.-Mexico border, and to document the very dangerous journey that migrants go through when they try to achieve their American dream. At the same time, because these processes are complex, it's not just about the journey, but it's about the entrance to the United States and how immigrants deal with their experience, refugees, people that are applying for asylum, that are able to enter the United States, that face a different culture, that face a country where they don't speak the language. Something like that reminds me to some of the experiences that I have lived, but I have had the privilege of being able to study in the United States. I mean, a very different situation, but at the same time, it allows you to to talk to the people in their own language. I have always enjoyed and dear the possibility of speaking Spanish. It's for me very important to speak Spanish because it connects me with my culture. So this experience of 1 year and a half going, and traveling along the migration routes and interviewing migrants of different nationalities, because transcontinental immigration also it's something that you find along the route. It's not just Central American migrants and Mexican migrants, but also people coming from the African continent, from Southeast Asia, and you understand the complexities that and the problems that they face in their countries. So you talk to them. They had been running from a complicated reality, and they arrive to a continent where they are also experiencing a very complicated reality. People also from Cuba. I have interviewed a number of amazing persons, and immigrants are probably the most amazing people that I've met, because they with a very vulnerable situation, not a lot of resources, but a lot of a willingness and effort, and they are extremely interesting and amazing people that are coming to the United States, that are willing to leave their places because they want a better life for themselves and for their families. And they're not going to cause problems. They're going to be, they're coming to work. And the experiences that they have lived will make them stronger. And so, trying to make sense of this and trying to document the difficulties that they experience with criminal networks, because that was also part of the studies that I did, trying to understand the complexity of the structures of organized crime and how this diversification of activities of the so-called drug cartels also involve people. So the connection between smuggling, criminal organizations, drug trafficking, and how some of the migrants are involved in these activities, not because they want, but because of their complicated, vulnerable situation. Sometimes they're kidnapped. There are networks that kidnap them, and the involvement of children and women mostly, but also men, in networks of human trafficking, the human trafficking rings. It has been a very important experience for me. Not very happy. And right now I am trying to put together all the material that I have collected since the year 2015, when I was living in Brownsville, Texas. I go there very often. I go to the border very often, and I wanted to continue just to close the study during the Trump administration time, the migration protection protocols and metering, and then COVID-19 arrived. So I need to do a little bit more research, but I cannot go to the field. I hope that at the end of the year, I can just close this chapter and complete the interviews to understand what's going on, because with Title 42, because of COVID-19, people are staying at the border. Migrants are staying at the border, and they are, the complexity and the criminal groups that I have found have multiplied in many ways, because there are many people waiting to enter the United States. Right now, President Biden is allowing some unaccompanied minors to enter the United States-Mexico border, but they are also deporting. There are mixed messages that are being told right now. So I would like to finish this. I work with students that have been amazing. Right now, I'm working with two students. Probably one is here today. She's helping me to put together, a report on what is happening right now at the U.S.-Mexico border, which is complicated. So I just wanted to talk. I just wanted to say that it has been a lot of work. I have approximately 500 interviews, and very recently was able to connect with the people in Tijuana, so I can see how the camps are there at the Tijuana-San Diego border, and how people are in a situation where they have a lot of expectations. So more people are coming, more than because they have this expectation that they will be able to be treated in a different way, and not necessarily this is going to happen. So the conditions are becoming more complicated now, and I think that putting all this material together from 2015, from the Barack Obama administration, the deportation that took place, that put people at risk also, but also the pull and push factors, this pull factor, that's the jobs are available in this country. You don't want people, it's the kind of like, people are not, are prevented to enter, but at the same time, there are jobs available. And people know if they cross the checkpoint, not the border, but the checkpoint, they will be able to get a job. So also the integration of migrant communities during COVID times and after they get in, it's something important to analyze too. So I have done work at different levels, and I know a lot of my colleagues are also concerned. Dr. Jack Goldstone and Dr. Justin Guest are studying what happens with migrant communities once they arrive to the United States. So I welcome any question, and it's a pleasure for me to be here to talk a little bit about the things that I have done lately with my colleagues. Thank you. So, we can now, thank you for being here. We have like around half an hour of questions and answers. I would like to ask you all some questions, but the audience made two interesting questions here. One is, I think for you, for the three of you, Kristen, Sharnita, and Wendy, about the programs the initiatives that you lead. The question is, who is the most critical stakeholder in this work at George Mason University? Wendy, Sharnita, and Kristen, or any order that you would like to put.
So I guess, that's a really challenging question, because I feel like that's part of what we're recognizing particularly with ARIE, I think also with the QEP, that there are multiple stakeholders. It really is about significant institutional transformation. And when you are looking at such wide scale change, then the stakeholders are many. And I'm not sure that there's a way to value like who's more critical, because all are really critical to be involved and a part of it. I think that, certainly, I think I said earlier, for me, it's so much about the students, and the students sort of really firing us up. And we're answering in many ways. I feel like faculty and staff, we're answering the call. We're answering their call to do better, to be better. And so there is certainly, I think, a real emphasis on the students as stakeholders in terms of the work that we're doing. But again, I think that across the board, this is such significant transformation for the organization and the university that you really look at all faculty and staff as critical stakeholders in this work. So that's just my thoughts.
No, I think Shanita is absolutely correct. And I think without the beautiful nudging of our students, a lot of the work that we are doing right now, we would not be as far along, right, as we are. It's because our students have insisted, dare I even say at moments demanded, that we be responsive to what they are experiencing in the classroom, across our campus, and in different communities. And in response to your question, and Margot, thank you for that. It actually has been really quite incredible to see the way in which the Enslaved People of George Mason Memorial has impacted our Mason community. Students have had a renewed sense of value, the power of research, and the way in which historical research in particular, it's not something that's just about dead white men, right, from a long ago past, but rather that it resonates and has meaning in our present. And so they are making those connections. And in fact, sometimes I've shared in other presentations when I've had the whole slide PowerPoint thing, that about 2 years in, when we started to share the research with our Mason community, we had some big kind of posters up across campus, and we're talking to different constituencies. And then one morning we walked out, and at the center of the George Mason campus, we have a huge statue of George Mason the Fourth. And there's a lot of tradition. We are a young institution. We're about to hit the 50-year mark this coming spring. And so we're a young institution, but the George Mason statue is a kind of critical part of our campus culture, so much so that when students arrive, they rub the toe of George Mason, they take their graduation photos on George Mason. And so this project has unsettled, I think, students, and it is going to be interesting going forward to see how the memorial, which will include two panels, one honoring the enslaved girl named Penny, one honoring the enslaved man named James, the way in which the memorial shifts some of our community culture and traditions. But again, 2 years ago, we walked out at the base of the George Mason statue, right at the Mason's feet, there was a note. Student had ripped out a piece of notebook paper and jotted down, "George, I will take the education that you would not let Penny have." And it still shakes me to my core that even before the actual memorial is in place, once students understood, right, that it was going to happen, we could begin to see that shift and the power of what that means for our community. George Mason is a 60-40 institution where 60% of our students are students of color. Many of our students are first generation. Many of them are immigrants or children of immigrants. And so the idea that Mason held more than 100 people in bondage, and to be able to honor, to celebrate the lives of those held in bondage, as a way to critically think about who we are in the present, and again, who we were in the past, I think absolutely is connecting with our community, with our campus community.
And the only thing I think I would add about the stakeholder comment, really, and Shanita put it beautifully, that they're all stakeholders and we're trying to account for everyone, is that both of these initiatives, I think the President's Task Force and the QEP, are really trying to make sure that we give voice and space to each of the stakeholders to understand the unique ways that each of the programs and opportunities will impact them. And I think for those familiar with critical service learning and community engaged pedagogies, it's really about balancing the community voice and the community need with the student learning outcomes and the student experience, and being able to say that we're prioritizing and holding both there. And then in that way, we need faculty who are trained and able to do that. So it weaves really everybody as a part of the process. And I think making sure that we're just listening and providing space and voice. And the students have beautifully held us accountable to that, and made sure that we don't let up on making sure that those voices are heard. And I think they've been the best accountability measure and voice that we could have in this work.
This is a question for Wendy. It says, Wendy, I'm interested in the students' emotional response to the research process and learnings. In what ways did the work change students' goals or plans or thoughts about how to make change?
So I touched on that a bit already, but only other thing I'll add is that I think often, we assume that only students who are history majors, right, can engage in historical research, can go into the archives and find meaning. And one of the exciting things about our research project was that we invited students from many different disciplines into the process. And in fact, what we discovered is that because of their different disciplinary interests, they brought different sets of questions. So for example, one of our students is a major in community health. And so his questions around the enslaved people that George Mason held in bondage was, well, what were their health conditions? What were they eating? What type of diseases did they have? And so, in fact, rather than imagining that we could only work with students that are history majors and minors, by creating an interdisciplinary research opportunity, by inviting students in from multiple spaces across campus, that in fact enriched the project. And we continue to invite students in from multiple corners of campus. So much so that, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, one of my dear colleagues, Nix, who leads the Mason Pep Band, he reached out to me and said, my students would love to be involved in this as well. And so we shared with them some of the archival evidence that students uncovered, and they created original musical scores and spoken word pieces that spoke to the lives of enslaved people. Jump forward another year. We worked with another group of another faculty member who was leading a marketing and branding course. And we invited those students to help us develop marketing and branding material for the enslaved people of George Mason Memorial. And again, we shared the research. We met with them. They went out to Gunston Hall Plantation. And so I think one of the things that we've discovered and that students have discovered is that all of them have skills and talents that they can bring to the memorial project, but then they can also leverage that as they move forward beyond Mason and can speak to how they've contributed to the memorial project.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wendy. I don't know if anybody else has a question. I do have questions. Lisa also might have questions. Lisa, would you like to ask something, or should I go? Okay.
Yeah, I would love to ask a question, and it kind of goes to something that Sharnita said a little bit earlier about creating the competencies among particularly faculty such as myself, to borrow from Kristen as a white, able-bodied white woman who wants very much to be an ally in this space, who seeks out opportunities. I just signed up for a Florida course on a diversity training certificate just because I so much want to be the best ally I can be. I'm wondering if you can just talk about some of the resources that the President's Task Force might be creating or making available on campus. And what are those competencies that you're developing?
So part of the conversation right now is to your question, Lisa. It's really, what are the competencies? What are the skills and behavioral things that we want to see happening, and what are the skills that need to be in place for those behaviors to occur? So some conversation is in the committee is around that, and we will be, with so much of this work, it does extend beyond the committee conversations, obviously, because there are so many experts and people who have expertise in this area across the campus. And so the committee is also looking at and talking with those individuals as well to get a better sense of, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion work, what are some of the different competencies that are critical to being able to actively and intentionally create an inclusive environment. And some of that, when we look at those types of competencies, we are looking at and talking about particular trainings. Some of it is really about the ability to have difficult conversations, the ability in terms of in a classroom when issues come up, when people share their experience and there are perhaps points of tension or conflict, that individuals are equipped with the skills to be able to facilitate those types of conversations. So that's some of what we're talking about. We are certainly looking at what's it mean to increase awareness. That in and of itself, there's an aspect of some of our conversations being focused on, it's important to think about the self-development piece and really helping and providing providing developmental opportunities for faculty and staff, and that can be sometimes one of the examples that we reference is around emotional intelligence and just heightening some of the competencies that are part of that, so that again, one's self-awareness is heightened, and there's an opportunity for some of the growth that happens in that process that allows for individuals to, again, shift and change behaviors in some way. So a lot of the conversations right now are, what are the competencies? We haven't, determined all of those yet. So that's a big part of the conversation. And then when we look at some of the competencies that we have identified, whether it is the ability to have difficult conversations, whether it's, an adaptability, a flexibility, if we're talking about compassion and showing empathy and those types of things, those we've identified. We're talking about what is the training, what's the opportunity, the developmental opportunity, what does that look like? Because it's really, I think, important for us to recognize, and I think part of our conversations are that it is developmental. So it's not as if one class all of a sudden something changes. And we kind of jokingly say that training shouldn't be viewed as a personality car wash. You can't sort of run someone through and think that you're going to get something else on the other side. And so it's a very broad look at what are the different type of developmental opportunities and activities that we can provide and engage faculty and staff in to begin to help, again, shift awareness so that we can then encourage a shift in behavior.
Thank you so much for that. I'm the car wash example. That's fabulous. It's interesting that we require sexual, assault training, that harassment training, that we require IT training, that we require all of these things, and yet some of those skills and competencies that we need are not currently part of the training that we receive and so desperately need.
And if I could add one thing really quickly, I think that really illuminates the way that a lot of this work is already starting, and honestly, the collaborations between the QEP, the task force, and other things on campuses. We have a group that's a really awesome collaboration between the Curriculum Pedagogy Subcommittee of the Task Force, the QEP, our Teaching and Learning Center, and our College of Education and Human Development. That's right now trying to create a tool that's sort of a syllabus audit for faculty from a teaching perspective, to be thinking through decolonizing the syllabus, as I think many of us like to call it, looking at are all of my readings, speakers, and key content, are they all white males, or are they all white females?
Yep.
If I teach in a field where all the canons of research are from white males, then what is the lesson plan I'm having where we go through and scrutinize and talk about why that is with the students and think about how we can change that? So we're trying to, that's it's a really cool collaboration between all of these groups right now who want to be able to have, we know that there's faculty who want a resource and they want it quickly because they're in that, they know they need to do something with their syllabus, but they don't exactly know what it is. We want to have something ready to go that's a tool that it doesn't, and it's, Srini, you put it beautifully. It's not a one and done. You don't do this checklist and then you're over, but it's at least at a first glance, what's inherently, objectively, very clearly problematic about my syllabus and my teaching, and there's some that's at the critical consciousness level too, are students performing in equitable ways, right? How is my teaching? Am I favoring particular groups? There's a lot that's around that kind of self-reflective, and then also some very basic, what are my course assignments? What are my readings? What's my content? Yep. So that's been really fun. We have a team of faculty from across the university who's working on that right now as an outcome of all of these different initiatives that are happening.
Okay, let me see. Okay, Wendy, would you like to say something, or?
You're good. I co-sign on everything Shanita and Kristen just said.
Okay, perfect. I have a question too for all of you. I would like to know, what are the most challenging parts of the efforts that you lead? What are it's not that I want to only focus on the problems or the challenges, but I would like to know, what is the most challenging part that you have observed, not only of the effort, but of the current situation? that you are all observing at George Mason and overall? This will be a question for all of you.
Well, I'll start. If I understand your question correctly, what's the most challenging aspect of doing this work at Mason? Yeah. Okay. I think it's twofold. One, I would say, there is no finish line. Right? I mean, we who have been doing this work and we who have newly arrived to doing this work, hopefully understand that this is work that requires a commitment to the long haul. Right? Whether you are, engaged in civil rights activism, social justice, racial justice, it almost requires an interesting balance between being pessimistic and optimistic, which is the pessimism is there will continue to be structures and ideologies of inequality. And so because they will continue to exist, we must continue to be courageous and committed to doing the work, knowing that we will be doing it until forever, right? So I think that's one challenge, because it's easy to get disheartened, or we all get exhausted and we have to pause and breathe and care for ourselves and our own spirits. And then the second challenge, it seems to me, is that it's just the depth and the breadth. I mean, of what it means to do this work in and we've already spoken to this, in such a large institution. And there are many people that are a part of doing this work and committed to doing the work, but it is no small feat to move a large institution forward. And so I think the duality of those two challenges, right, that it's forever and it's a massive task, can seem quite daunting. And so it really does require kind of that deep internal drive to keep doing this. And to end on a positive note, I suppose I would say the inspiration for me, at least, comes from students and working with incredible colleagues.
So if I would certainly, I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Wendy said, and might only add that I particularly, what resonates with me is sort of that tension between being optimistic and pessimistic. It's sort of this polarity that you're dancing between, because this is work that at the heart of it, it is difficult and challenging, and it is work that obviously has called you in some way. And so there's deep investment in that, and the energy that I think we bring to that type of work. It is sometimes challenging to manage your energy in that. And also because of that deep commitment, when you meet the resistance, or when you meet some, maybe attitudes and behaviors that aren't as open and welcoming to that growth, that change, that challenge, it can be de-energizing. It can be disheartening in a way. And I think to walk between, or to move between that dance, is probably one of the greater challenges, because there is this aspect of, what Wendy spoke to, that internal motivation, but certainly in terms of so many people being committed to this and bringing their energy to it, you've got that to fuel you as well. But you will encounter those who aren't ready yet to be open to that. And making sure that what you remain focused on is the fuel of the positive energy of those who are, again, committed to these changes as well, and not allow necessarily for that other energy to drain you in some way. I think that is really, it's a challenge and a daily one.
I think is really interesting is the first thing that came into my head as a challenge was also attention or a holding. And so I think it's interesting for all three of our perspective. It was like the holding these things at the same time, which our society's gotten really bad at doing. So I'm glad that we're all trying to hold things at the same time. And for me, it's holding the desire and the need and the stories that we're hearing from students and faculty and community partners and things about their experiences. And so the urgent desire to do something about that, with the fact that institutional change and transformation and attitude change takes time. And so, and resources and, people and that kind of grassroots effort. And so I do feel like our institutions have a lot to learn from organizers of historic social change movements. I mean, if we think just recent to Black Lives Matter organizers about who've known and held true all the things that Wendy said about the need for moving forward. It takes time. There's no end goal and that we're going to have to keep going and care for ourselves in the process. And I think that's one thing that with an initiative that's connected to our accreditation and has an expectation of a 5-year evaluative period where we're going to show some sort of change, that's something that has that tension that I've really been holding of wanting to do this well and do it in a way that's sustainable and a way that is honors the stories and experiences of everybody who's been a part of it. And then someone's going to ask me to report on the change that happened related to it in 5 years, and being able to kind of balance that they both are important in different ways and both have to happen. But I think if we're keeping the centering of who and why in it, it's easier to kind of go through all of that. But it is the tension of just those competing kind of needs and priorities, and people wanting to know what you did and when you're going to do it and how much money it's going to cost. And but the attitude change, really, it does take time too.
That's great. Thank you very much. We have 4 minutes, but there's a question that I think I missed from Michelle King, here, Associate Director of Ashoka. And she says, it's very important, I think we can close with that, that your work is so important that where we can find your research. Could you explain, all of us can just very quickly say where we can find some of the things that you have all done?
So if someone wants to see some of the work, you can go into YouTube, and if you just put in Enslaved People of George Mason or Enslaved Children of George Mason, there's several videos that we've created, and that you can see that work, and other links are also embedded on the YouTube site, or you can just Google Enslaved People of George Mason Memorial and additional information, other interviews, even some documents that have been created through Mason Legacy Center, which is the kind of institutional framework we've created to continue the memorial research.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. Shanita.
So probably in terms of keeping up with everything that the task force is doing, the best place is the website. So I'm going to put it in the chat. So you've got a direct link. I encourage you to take a look. Documents from each of the committees are there. In terms of the recommendations that were made, you can see those. So that really is, and there's stories of the individuals who are involved, which for me serves as part of the inspiration. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at those and learn a little bit more about the overall initiative, but also the people who are doing the work.
Thank you very much, Kristen.
Yeah, and Sam, I just dropped the QEP website in the chat. So same as Shanita said, that we keep our committee list and our meeting minutes and updates on progress there. And then eventually it will redirect to a new website that will be created for my office, but we're not there yet. But if you keep that qep.gmu.edu, you'll find all those resources.
Very good. Thank you so much. I mean, just in the terms of my work, there are several articles that that connects, my work with human trafficking, migrant smuggling, organized crime. Of course, it's all in my website, my CV at George Mason University. And I would like to thank you so much for all your effort, for this wonderful conversation, a panel of all women. It's amazing. It's amazing to have been working with Lisa and with Anne in this initiative. So I'm very thankful. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Kristen, Shanita, Wendy. Lisa.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, all of you. This has been amazing, and you all are amazing, and it's an honor to work with you and call you colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you. We have 10 seconds only, so have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.